From Tex Avery to Friz Freleng to Robert McKimson, there are a number of important directors who worked on the Looney Tunes cartoons, proving their skill at creating funny scenarios with those characters. And certainly two directors who've gotten some of the most attention for their contributions to the Warner Brothers cartoons are Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett. Infamous for being rivals while at Termite Terrace and even afterwards, it's hard to deny their influence and their roles in animation history. Both certainly took different approaches in what they thought would generate the most laughs, but Jones and Clampett are pivotal in shaping the Looney Tunes. Which director do I prefer? Well, I'm about to make that comparison. But how did they first break out at Termite Terrace? Many of Chuck Jones' first cartoons actually took on a more Disney and Silly Symphony-like approach. They had an emphasis on cute animals, and were more sentimental than what his later work became known for. Jones was the creator of Sniffles the Mouse, for instance. However, he also directed some of the early Bugs Bunny Elmer Fudd cartoons, and in those you can see some of his comic sensibilities shine through. Interesting enough, Jones worked at Bob Clampett's unit at Leon Schlesinger Productions before he got the chance to direct his own shorts. Clampett, meanwhile, was known for submitting all sorts of story ideas for animated shorts, and one of those ideas involved a pig named Porky, one of the first Looney Tunes characters to become an audience favorite. Clampett became famous for pushing the surrealist possibilities of animation, most notably in Porky and Wacky Land. That short is an example of just how much Clampett wanted to push the imagery in his cartoons and give audiences something strange and out of this world, and it succeeds quite brilliantly at throwing one bonkers image after another at you. Clampett definitely brought a fast-paced sensibility to his cartoons and was infamous for giving his animators plenty of freedom in their drawings. Chuck Jones, meanwhile, liked to build his comic situations and often worked closely with Michael Maltese in devising many of the gags in his shorts. He tried his hardest to develop the characters and give them fully rounded personalities, most famously with Daffy Duck. Jones took Daffy's goofy persona and made him greedier and more jealous, allowing for greater interactions with Bugs Bunny. In addition to developing Daffy, Jones also came up with his own creations. I already mentioned Sniffles, and he was also responsible for Marvin the Martian, Pepe Le Pew, Wile E. Coyote, and the Roadrunner. He often liked to repeat scenarios with his characters, but with slight tweaks here and there. The Coyote and the Roadrunner shorts, for example, always about the Coyote, constantly trying to catch the Roadrunner using whatever device he orders from the Acme Corporation. This, of course, blows up in his face. As a child, I used to find the Roadrunner shorts repetitive, but revisiting the cartoons later on, I appreciate them for how brilliantly timed the gags are, and the creativity of the many inventions the Coyote used. Bob Clampett had his own characters to be proud of too. In addition to Porky, he worked with Tex Avery to create Daffy and devise Tweety Bird. His first appearance in A Tale of Two Kitties had him dealing with two cats, Babbitt and Costello, also created by Clampett. And yes, they are parodies of Abbott and Costello, an example of how he liked to include references to movies, books, and music in his cartoons. Clampett's version of Tweety established him as violent and willing to knock his opponents down by any means necessary. The off-color jokes were also an example of how he liked to thumb his nose at the Hays Office censors. He was not afraid of including material in his cartoons that was risque for the time period, and that probably added to their appeal with moviegoers. Clampett did not just work with these stable Looney Tunes characters, though. At one point, he directed an adaptation of Dr. Seuss's book, Horton Hatches the Egg. While the short stayed somewhat faithful to the book, Clampett incorporated a lot of his own comedic sensibilities, including a fish who shoots himself. Something else Clampett and Jones had in common was their love for music and incorporating it into their work. Both Rabbit of Seville and What's Upper Dock use music from famous stage productions to great effect in depicting Elmer Fudd's chase after Bugs. Chuck Jones managed to recontextualize these pieces of music in ways that were comedic, yet retaining their original dramatic power. He also used music as a major plot device in One Froggy Evening. Throughout the short, Michigan J. Frog only sings and dances for construction worker, resulting in him thinking he can make millions. The perfect match of Michigan with songs like Hello My Baby and I'm Just Wild About Harry created instantly unforgettable images. Chuck Jones, Michael Maltese, and composer Milt Franklin even wrote an original tune, The Michigan Rag, specifically for the frog to sing. Bob Clampett, meanwhile, showed a preference for jazz in his work, most notably in Tin Pan Alley Cats, in which a cat visits a jazz club. There's also his controversial short called Black and the Seven Dwarfs, the most infamous of the Censored 11 Warner Brothers cartoons, which also place an emphasis on jazz. Of course, both of these cartoons are known for their racial stereotypes and should definitely be viewed as products of their time. I'm just going to leave it at that. Gag-wise, Jones filled his cartoons with all sorts of hilarious moments. While most remember the slapstick scenes like Wile E. Coyote slamming into his own painted tunnel and Daffy Duck frequently getting harmed in over-the-top ways, Jones incorporated other forms of comedy. Along with Michael Matisse, he added a verbal wit to his cartoons, like the clever ways in which Bugs Bunny would mess with his opponents with some sly remark. He would also take advantage of whatever location or time period he could place the characters in. Think about Duck Dodgers and its parody of science fiction films and serials of the era. He used the audience's knowledge of Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers to enhance the visual invention. When he directed Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century in 1953, there was still wonder about what the future might hold, and that allowed him to come up with many brilliant ideas for his own vision of the future. Bob Clampett had his own love for sight gags, whether it was placing a humorous piece of signage or writing in a scene, or stretching what physics was capable of in a cartoon universe. He also loved to parody Hollywood culture, most evident in What's Cookin' Doc, in which Bugs Bunny attends the Oscars and tries to make his case for why he deserves the shiny trophy. The cartoon takes on Tinseltown and the pomp and circumstance of the ceremony, with Bugs even doing impressions of the actors. Finally, I'm going to mention my favorite cartoon from each director. Chuck Jones directed many classics, and yet I don't find it that difficult to find a top choice. It has to be Duck Amuck. He truly played with the art form of animation in this short, as Daffy finds himself coping with an animator constantly changing the scene. Daffy's complete bewilderness, as well as impatience, leads to great outbursts. But through the short, Jones also explores the flexibility of cartoon characters and how you can do anything with them. Daffy views himself as an actor who can take on almost any role, and honestly, he's not wrong. You probably already know the final reveal of who the cheeky animator is, but it does not make it any less exciting when we find out. As for Bob Clampett, he also has many great cartoons to his name. However, I have to go with Porky in Wacky Land. The surreal and Dolly-esque nature of this cartoon leads to so many inspired bits. In many ways, Porky represents the audience's confusion at what's going on. And yet, there's also a delight in seeing how much wild imagery Clampett can throw into the short's 7 minutes. It really is an example of the unlimited potential of animation, and how he was willing to mess with the viewer's expectation. He wanted the audience, who saw Porky and Wacky Land as part of a bill, to never forget what they just witnessed as soon as the main feature started. However, it's not merely an excuse to animate some strange scenes. There's an actual story here, with Porky trying to catch a dodo bird, so there's a personal investment in wondering if he'll succeed in his goal. So to conclude, which director do I prefer? Both of them were excellent animation directors, but if I have to pick one, I'm going with Chuck Jones. Bob Clampett is certainly important to the history of Looney Tunes, and directed many entertaining cartoons, and I love his willingness to try anything. However, Jones' shorts have long been my favorites in the Warner Brothers cartoon catalog. How he took the likes of Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, and Elmer Fudd in new directions, and also brought us iconic creations of his own. And he was not afraid to experiment either. Now let me know in the comments whether you prefer the animated shorts of Chuck Jones or Bob Clampett, and I'll see you next time.